Good morning on this Sunday, February 28th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Emotions run high over voting bills moving forward under the Gold Dome. Also, former Senator David Perdue passes on a run in 2022, and Governor Brian Kemp announces he'll soon make the COVID-19 vaccines available to more groups, including teachers. Darren, Phil, Kathy, and Janelle are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
A proposed major change to Georgia's absentee voting laws cleared a big hurdle. For opponents, the debate was personal and emotional.
I had to come to the well after 45 years being in this body. And I probably had a lot of friends before today. But I want to tell you, we're going to fight.
An emotional Senator David Lucas spoke out against the bill that would change the requirements for requesting an absentee ballot in Georgia. Voters would have to include their Georgia driver's license or ID number on their application or a photocopy of an acceptable government ID. It would do away with the state's current signature match verification.
An efficiency measure and a security measure. It is not about disenfranchising anybody.
The Senate approved the bill along party lines 35-18. So I want to get right to the debate. Janelle, I'll start with you this week. Senator Lucas and other Democrats say Republicans want to tighten all these rules because they lost in November and the 2 U.S. Senate races. If there's no evidence of widespread fraud, are these major changes necessary?
Yes, it's absolutely necessary because it's not necessarily about the fraud as much as it's about understanding that we had such a high turnout as it relates to absentee ballots. And we have to make sure that whenever there is a increase in a utilization of a particular process, that that process is done in a way where we can make sure that we secure and we protect the votes. And I have to say, I know I mentioned it last week, but it's really becoming really frustrating for me to continue to have to hear this conversation around how this is some type of disenfranchised moment for Black people or minorities in general because of the fact that we were encouraging people to put their voter ID numbers on their absentee ballots. That is not a complicated task. We are highly intelligent people, and every single time we continue to make it about that when it comes to something this simple, it sends a narrative and it creates a message that we are a people who can't figure out how to do what everyone else does. And that is really frustrating for me. So I really hope that we can move past these narratives and start really looking at it for what it is. And it is really strictly about making sure we secure every single person's vote.
Theron, if you have to provide a photo ID for in-person voting, should the same rules apply when you vote absentee?
Well, one of the things that I want our viewers to know, Lori, is that right now in Georgia, if you do request an absentee ballot online, you do have to show some form of identification, right? You have to sort of ID yourself as a person who is requesting this absentee ballot. But what's really going on here and where the debate really lies, Lori, is there is another pathway. Like Republicans could choose to figure out a way to work with Democrats to try to, get in a room and figure out what they can all agree on before you go and introduce roughly 80 bills. That's how many bills have been roughly introduced and up into this taping. But I want to say this about, particularly one thing that happened this week, and I want to commend Senator David Lucas, who is, by the way, not only a Democrat, but he's a Democrat that many Republicans not only like, but they can work with him. But you got to listen closely to what he said about how he lost friends on this. But the other thing I want to point out is that we had a portion in the bill this week that would eliminate Sunday voting. And I want to say this was a surgical, precise attempt by Republicans to disenfranchise people of color who vote, but more particularly Black voters. And so they had to remove that because that is what, I believe, sort of really inflamed this argument. The last thing I'll say is this. The no excuse absentee ballot was put in place in 2005, Lori. It was put in place by Republicans. Why are they changing it 15 years later after the election? I think it goes back to what Senator Lucas said. It's because they lost the elections. And so my thing is this: when I talk to a lot of state senators, and Phil know that I met with a few this week, a lot of them are saying, we don't even know what we're trying to fix. But trying to basically introduce 80 bills, which, by the way, is going to destroy the reputation of this state, is not the right way to go. And so I just wanted to say that I think that this is totally destructive. And by the way, we did have a bill introduced this week that I do agree with around voting, and that was a bill that was introduced by Senator Jen Jordan, who did say we need to sort of reduce the amount of time that we take to count absentee ballots, and we need to actually try to count them faster and maybe earlier on in the process. Now, that was one that did receive unanimous support. But ultimately, I think this is definitely a blatant attempt to disenfranchise black voters in this state.
Phil, there's a lot to flush out there that Theron brought up, but I want to first ask you, why is there an attempt to eliminate Sunday voting? Is that a partisan issue?
Well, let me just address Theron's first point. The Democrats should have been included in the package of election reform. Well, you can tell from his remarks that that's not going to work. Republicans are being called names. They're using the myth of voter suppression when more people are voting than ever in the state of Georgia. And what has he said? The package is totally destructive. How are you going to work with Democrats that are trying to undermine election reform at every turn? And let's go back a second. Why are we doing this? The system was overwhelmed with the absentee ballots. There was a problem with signature verification because signature verification was weakened, and that's why I always talk about that 8,000 votes that came into those ballot boxes with dumping, and the Secretary of State's office even saw that and exposed it. But with regard to what they're trying to do, yes, there's a lot of bills. They're trying to undo that terrible March settlement that Secretary of State Raffensperger did and caved in to Stacey Abrams on weakening the verifications. That's why we need ID for absentee ballots. And also, the bottom line, too, is this is going to make it easier for all 159 county election offices. That's who runs the elections in Georgia. These things are tightening it up to help the poll managers, too, especially guarding these boxes and have them in precincts now. Have someone watch them 24 hours because the chain of custody was broken on November 3rd and on January 5th in the last elections.
Okay.
Sunday, that you could have a reasonable compromise on that.
But that's what I wanted to ask you, Phil, because you didn't answer that question about the Sunday voting. Why eliminate Sunday voting? And, there's still a lot of controversy about your 8,000 number that you bring up every week. So before I get to Kathy, I want you to address the Sunday voting.
Yeah, the Sunday voting, I think that was part of the negotiations with regard to how much we would do in the package for election reform. I could go either way on that. I think it ought to be cut back. But I don't see that as racism or directed against anybody. A lot of people want to vote on Sunday, but I don't see the racism part of it.
Kathy, you've been following this issue closely all week. Your thoughts?
Well, thanks to Theron for offering an awful lot of clarity to what's in those bills, and I'll try not to repeat anything that he said, but let's just go to this point about the Sunday voting. So the compromise that's come up is that there will be one weekend during early voting when people can vote, and there will be some flexibility about what day it is. Well, obviously, if you're trying to maximize the number of people that are going to vote on the weekend, then it becomes problematic for doing it on Sunday because most places won't do it all day long on a Sunday in deference to people who are attending churches on Sunday. So what we're doing is hurting people who are hourly workers or even people who have limitations during the week for getting to early voting. Having voting on the weekends, including Sunday, gives everybody a full range of options to go. I think that this is particularly making it rough on black churches that have a history of helping people get to the polls who might otherwise have a difficulty if they don't do it as part of their riding on the church bus. So I think that's really important. It's also important to know that we've got bills going back and forth from the House and the Senate, and this week is crossover day. So there went my cat. Things have to dots back. Things have to pass over in order to continue to be discussed. So there's going to be an awful lot of horse trading. But in an election statewide where you had a 12,000 vote margin for president and then in the runoffs less than 100,000 votes, what you're looking at is surgical precision to try to eliminate groups of voters that vote in a particular way. That's where the racism component comes into this.
All right, I have to leave it there. I'm getting the wrap, everybody. Thank you. Coming up, former Senator David Perdue makes his decision about 2022. We'll discuss after the break.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Former Senator David Perdue announced this week his decision is personal, not political, but he will not make a comeback run in 2022. Phil, Perdue really could have cleared the field in this race, the Republican field. Does this now mean it's wide open on the GOP side? And, how much will former President Trump play a role? And I keep hearing, the name Herschel Walker bounced around as well.
Well, your last question is the big question. Mark my words, former President Donald Trump will be actively involved in the 2022 GOP primaries in Georgia. And there's calls going back and forth. There's visits going back and forth to Mar-a-Lago where the president is monitoring the Georgia primaries. It was a surprise to me that David Perdue didn't want to do the run. I agree that he probably could have been the strongest Republican candidate and he would probably have cleared the field. But I think what's happened now is that there's a lot of phone calls going on between football legend Herschel Walker. He's close friends. He has been a long time with the former president. And I did speak with Kelly Loeffler, the former U.S. Senator, to see what she thought. And I think pretty much all of the Republicans agree that the next few weeks will be critical. Who's going to line up for perhaps Secretary of State? I know that Brad Raffensperger is definitely going to be opposed. And who's going to line up maybe for Lieutenant Governor? There's rumblings that Jeff Duncan ought to be opposed. And this is by the Trump camp. And also, what's going to happen with Governor Kemp? Of course, going after an incumbent governor is a tough one. But Lori, ask me these questions in 2 or 3 weeks, and we may have some clarity on the role of the president and who's going to run for the U.S. Senate seat, because the Warnock term is up in 2 years.
And Kathy, I do want to focus again on the Senate seat. The Republican winner will face the now incumbent Raphael Warnock, who has to think about 2022, even though he just won his seat last month. Senator Perdue says Georgia is not a blue state, Kathy, and he believes any Republican will beat Warnock.
Well, remains to be seen, right? It's very difficult to unseat an incumbent. I think last I saw 96% of incumbents win their re-election, so that's just going to be hard on its face. Secondly, let me tell you, Democrats are spending a lot of time praying that Donald Trump gets involved in elections in Georgia, because the last time he did it, it didn't work out so well for Republicans. I don't think he's reformed himself in any way that would make him have good judgment on what passes for politics down here. So I think my hat's off to Senator Warnock, because, he knew going in that he'd have to turn around and run 2 years out. I think he's done an excellent job in the time he's been there. I think he's going to be making his way around the state, and I don't think it's a cakewalk for any Republican, and I think we'll see that by the quality of the candidates that get in.
But Janelle, one of those names for a possible run in 2022, Phil had mentioned former Senator Kelly Loeffler, who has launched Greater Georgia, which is a new voter registration group that can counter Fair Fight. And one of the tenets, Janelle, is for the GOP to promote these big tent policies. Do you think this is where Republicans struggle in terms of social issues and in terms of attracting minorities to the party?
I know that is an aspect of Greater Georgia. I think the voter registration piece is something that really excites me, because Republicans haven't always engaged on the voter registration side like the Democrats have. So there are still many, many people who are not registered to vote in Georgia. And then there's people who are coming into the state as well. So that's a big piece. And when it comes to expanding the tent, this is a discussion that I have said for numerous times and numerous years, is that we do need to make sure we do that. But we always have to tread that line because we do not want to play identity politics. Identity politics is what causes you to make discussions focus on race and racism versus on agenda and policies. But we are making sure that we understand the cultural differences, and we do need to become increasingly more culturally aware as we are moving forward. So I believe that this is exactly what is a concept that the Republican Party needs. I'm happy to see that she is putting her resources behind it in order to support this. It's definitely going to benefit a lot of candidates as well.
Theron, what do you think about this new Greater Georgia? Because with Fair Fight, Stacey Abrams was extremely successful in registrations, but this time around she was very successful in getting those folks to the polls. And that's what happened, I guess, in January that gave the Democrats the 2 wins in the Senate was the Republicans didn't show up, especially in a lot of those GOP districts.
Yeah, I totally agree, Lori. And let's add a third category, which is you can't take away any credit from Stacey Abrams and Fair Fight. The countless amount of years that they've led with, issues around legal advocacy, right? Like, had we not figured out a legal pathway to make sure that we don't suppress voters and disenfranchise voters, I mean, that was something that Fair Fight has been doing for many years. But what former Senator Loeffler is doing, I think at its face, it's going to not be welcome with a lot of people in Georgia because, I mean, she is a former U.S. Senator who spent the majority of her time campaigning against a black man, spreading lies and spreading rumors about his sermons and things that he was involved in. So I think it's a credibility issue going forward. We all know that she has millions and millions of dollars, and there's nothing wrong with that. She worked very hard for that money, and she's going to spend it to try to, quote unquote, create these big tent issues for the Republican Party. I mean, good luck with that, because I think the Republicans in Georgia right now, again, I'm going to say this, I think they're going to come out of this legislative session being so battered and bruised where it's going to be very, very hard for them to get away from former President Trump. I agree with Kathy. It's music to my ears, Phil, when you tell me that President Trump is going to come back to Georgia because he psychs Democrats better than anyone in this state. And so then I think ultimately, look, she's going to put a lot of money behind it. They're going to try to grow their shrinking base in Georgia. And it's a base that really follows Donald Trump. So I'll be very interested to see what these big tent issues are and how they're going to really change their tone and behavior, which we saw last year that was very destructive.
Phil, I'll give you the last 30 seconds here.
Well, I want to remind Kathy and Theron that President Trump won, I think, 130 counties, and the vote did drop in some GOP areas, and that can be punched up. So I think Senator Loeffler is doing well, and there'll be a backlash against the left, against Warnock and Ossoff and Biden, and some of the destructive anti-job policies and pro-high tax policies. So there'll be a backlash that'll help Republicans.
All right, well, wait and see. Thanks, everybody. Coming up, more folks will soon be eligible to sign up for the COVID-19 vaccine, and we'll discuss that straight ahead.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Governor Brian Kemp announced this week, starting March 8th, more Georgians will be eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine, including teachers. Kathy, this was something they have been lobbying for, but what does this mean for the school systems that have not been offering in-person schooling 5 days a week?
Well, I think everyone in the country, and Georgia's no exception, is ready to see kids get back in school. The question is, how do you do it safely? What do you do if something happens? As we anticipate a lot more vaccines, coming into the state and getting distributed across the country, because we've got probably a new vaccine being approved, plus the other vaccines are really ramping up. I think moving toward vaccinating school personnel and just being much more aggressive as we get down is the appropriate way to go. So with the governor making that announcement in anticipation of that, I think what we'll see is more schools opening, and clearly if the Biden stimulus package goes through, you'll see some incentives for schools to do that as well. So I think everybody's kind of looking forward and anticipating what the next couple of months might look like.
Absolutely. And Janelle, this will be a big step and most certainly welcome news, but there are still a lot of people out there who refuse to get the vaccine, and many of them in minority communities.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really interesting when you think about our past and our history as it relates to vaccines. It should shine a little bit of clarity as it relates to the Tuskegee Project and just a lot of things that took place. And so there are people that are hesitant, and I know that there are also a lot of our people in my community who are more holistic, and are just not vaccine-driven people in general. And I know a lot of friends and personal people who just never have gotten the flu vaccine either. So, I mean, there's a lot of aspects to that discussion, but I definitely feel that, especially our vulnerable population needs to go ahead and get the vaccine because it is something that will either, like I said, it can definitely prevent and save lives. But I understand it, and I do understand the argument, and so we'll just have to see how the statistics play out later on.
All right, moving on, Governor Kemp also urging Georgia's congressional delegation to pressure Washington leaders to renegotiate the terms of the new stimulus package because essentially it would give more money to states that have higher unemployment numbers. Theron, the governor says it's really not fair to punish Georgia just because our economy is doing better than, say, New York or California.
Well, listen, I think Governor Kemp understands that he's going to really be judged on two things going into an election year. One is going to be how do people really feel that how he dealt with this deadly pandemic. We lost a lot of lives, disproportionately Black people, people of color have died from this deadly pandemic. But also he's going to be judged on how he administers these vaccines. And so the argument that he's making, I mean, look, he's supposed to be able to go to the congressional delegation and make his point. And I do think that, Labor Commissioner Mark Butler is doing everything he can. There have been a lot of criticism, but there have been some recent praise of the work that he's trying to do. So, I'm not surprised that the governor is encouraging them to sort of get more money for the relief. And then as far as the unemployment rate, I mean, let's not forget, we still have hundreds of thousands of people in Georgia who are still trying to get back to work. And also, that the formula only calculates people who are actively seeking work. And so I think that ultimately it's the right thing for the governor to try to ask for. And then I think the congressional delegation will do everything they can to articulate the governor's comments.
Phil, do you think the governor's comments will fall on deaf ears when it comes to Washington insiders?
I don't think so. I think it's a classic Republican versus Democrat policy dispute, and the governor's right to highlight it because, for the past 30, 40 years, you could argue the Democratic Party everywhere has been known for raising taxes, bailouts of cities and states that are mismanaged by their own people. The Democrats are trying to bail out New York and California and these mismanaged states. This has nothing to do with COVID-19 relief and the large section of this huge bill. And so I think it's a glaring example of the two philosophies. Do you want the high taxes, bailouts, job-killing things, or do you really want COVID relief? And I think people are going to be upset if there's not enough money going to where it should be in this package.
All right, we'll leave it there, everybody. Thank you. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Kathy, we'll start with you and your cute little cat.
I don't know what happened with her. Let's see. I'm going to start with my loser. It's becoming a refrain. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has got a new way to disrupt. Now what she's been doing for the last couple days this week is calling for adjournment while debates are going on, which causes an instant realignment of the debate. It stops, and then they have to talk for an hour about whether to adjourn or not. So she's using this as a disruptive technique once again, instead of going down there to do the people's business. And she happened to do it this time while Congress was debating the Equality Act, which would extend legal protections against discrimination to LGBT people, something that people have been seeking for decades. Winner of the week will be the 6 former state legislators that will probably get medical marijuana licenses here in Georgia when they get issued. Hope we'll talk about that next week.
Sounds good. Phil, over to you.
Well, I've got a winner. It's Representative Ed Setzler over in Marietta. He has been working on the right to visit bill. You know, there's a lot of misinformation, and we didn't know a lot what was going on last March when we were really dealing with COVID-19 when it hit Georgia and everywhere else. And that was the sad tragedy of people not being able to visit loved ones in these assisted living homes and nursing homes. And so he's finally trying to open that door with strict safety protocols in place for these visits. And secondly, I have to laugh, the Democrats have used tactics like Marjorie Taylor Greene has done for decades. That's a tried and true tactic by both parties. So come on.
All right, Kathy and Phil went really long, so Theron, I have about a minute left in the show.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the gang and also everyone who wished me a happy birthday. So thank you so much for that. Also want to wish Congressman Lewis a happy birthday. He would have been 81 on February 21st. Also, I want to make Chief Randall Slaughter, who retired last week, the fire chief for the city of Atlanta. He's done a fantastic job. I've been with the city of Atlanta for many, many years. So definitely want to thank him for being a faithful viewer of the show, and good luck to you, Chief Charter, in your next role. And that's it, because they told me to wrap.
All right, Janelle, about 45 seconds. Go.
Okay, well, I definitely want to tell everyone to save the date. You know, Saturday, April 3rd is Danny Hamilton Appreciation Day. You may not know him personally, but if you've seen the Trump bus, that is his bus. And so we definitely want to encourage you to come out. I'll share all the details on my Facebook page. But we're going to celebrate Danny Hamilton, who's given so much to so many Republicans in this state.
Okay, everybody, thank you. And I'll make one. Tisha Stovall-Dula, Hall Middle School at Gwinnett County. She was named the State Counselor of the Year, and what a tough job during this past year to help those students deal with COVID and everything that goes with it. So congratulations to her, and we will see you all again next week. Thanks so much for joining us.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.